So after the Articles of Confederation failed, they had to get together and have a convention to make a new plan for government, and that's where the Constitutional Convention comes in, and they're going to create a constitution or a plan for government that they hope will work better than the Articles of Confederation. Key people involved: James Madison, Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson did not attend. So it wasn't like everyone was there, but there was a lot of great minds there who were determined to make the country better. The first plan proposed was the Virginia plan. It was supposed to favor the larger states. It was going to give the larger states more representation in government. The smaller states protested against this. They didn't like it. They thought it was unfair that the bigger states were going to have more power than them. So the second plan was the New Jersey plan, which proposed that each state should have equal representation in the new government, just like they did in the Articles of Confederation. In the end, they came up with a compromise, and that is called the Great Compromise. It would create two levels of the legislative branch of government, with the lower house, with states with larger population receiving more votes and more representation, while at the upper house or Senate, every state is equal, 2 representatives per state. So we have 100 senators in the Senate today. So every bill has to be voted on and passed through both the lower house and the Senate before it becomes law. In the lower house, the larger states have more power, but in the upper house, in the Senate, everyone is equal. So it's kind of a way to balance the power and make things more even for everyone. Roger Sherman proposed this plan, and this plan really saved the Constitutional Convention and kept the process moving forward to form the Constitution. Another compromise that wasn't nearly as good was the 3/5 compromise. It was a compromise over slavery. The southern states wanted African Americans to count towards their population base because that would give them more representation in the government. However, the northern states disagreed because the southern states were not giving these people any rights or the right to vote or anything like that. In the end, they came up with a pretty stupid compromise to count slaves as 3/5 of a person. Again, this just shows again how our forefathers, they did so many great things, but they really fell short on the issue of slavery. They should have ended slavery. They had another opportunity here to end slavery, but instead they agreed not to discuss slavery for another 20 years and continued slave going on, and they had this stupid 3/5 compromise of how to count the slaves. They did end the importation of slaves starting in 1807. However, the slave population continued to grow because all children born of slaves would also still become slaves. So slavery is a huge problem in our country at this time, and we didn't have the courage to fix it, unfortunately. Some key ideas in the Constitution. One is in popular sovereignty. Power belongs to the people. People have their power by voting, and ultimately the everyday person has the ultimate power. The other thing that came from Baron de Montesquieu of France is the idea that power should be shared and divided. Therefore, it's not abused. In our system, we have the system of federalism, which shares power between the central government and the states. Each level of government, and even the local government, each level of government has its own responsibilities and duties, and they have to work together and divide the power. Another way we divide power in the national or federal government is with checks and balances. We do this by having 3 different branches of government. The legislative branch is in charge of making and passing laws. The Great Compromise created the legislative branch. It composes of the House and the Senate, which meet on Capitol Hill. They make laws, they vote on them, and then they pass them on to the executive branch. If the president, who is in charge of the executive branch, approves the law, he then is in charge of enforcing it. The executive branch has thousands of employees that enforce the nation's laws and put them into action to make sure they're carried out. The third branch, the judicial branch, interprets the laws. They make sure all the laws follow the Constitution, and they also interpret whether people are following the laws properly. That's with your court cases and things like that. The Supreme Court is the top of the judicial branch and the most important part of it, but the lower courts do most of the work and carry out most of the cases. Only the most important cases go to the judicial branch. So the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch are 3 branches of government and are a system of checks and balances so no one becomes too powerful and abuses our power, and that's worked pretty well throughout our history. And that just talks about, we'll go in more detail about this later on, about the different duties of the 3 branches. The legislative branch meets at the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. The executive branch of course, is led in the White House by the president and his top staffers, but there are thousands of workers for the executive branch that help enforce and carry out the laws. The judicial branch is headed in the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C., but there are lower national courts in different districts throughout the country that do some of the smaller cases. Ratifying the Constitution, they approve it in Philadelphia, but still the states have to approve it or ratify it. 9 out of 13 states must approve it, and so the states are going to discuss the Constitution, decide if they support it. Not everyone was for it. Anti-Federalists like George Mason and Thomas Jefferson spoke out against the Constitution, saying that the Articles of Confederation was better and that this new plan for government was giving too much power to the national government. However, other great patriots like Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison argued for it. They were called the Federalists. They said the government needed to be stronger, needed to be more organized, and we need to be more united so we can create a strong country with a strong economy. The Federalists won out because they wrote papers to the newspaper, different essays, and that's called the Federalist Papers, to convince public opinion. Everyone read the newspaper back then, and the more they read these essays, the more people were convinced that the Constitution would be the best way forward for the country. In the end, the Constitution was ratified. As you can see, the red means there are places where they voted against the Constitution. The blue are places where they voted for it. The blue is more of the city and urban areas that had higher population, and more of the rural areas went against the Constitution, as you can see in the red. In order to appease the Anti-Federalists, James Madison added the first 10 amendments or official changes to the Constitution, and they were written to protect our individual rights. The Bill of Rights makes up the first 10 amendments, and they are, the rights that we all know and understand: our freedom to assemble, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, right to bear arms, right to a fair and speedy trial, among others. These are to make sure that the government can never ever take away these rights, and this system has protected our rights for over 200 years, and we're going to continue to look at it more later.